Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the CAI live webinar, Protecting Your Community from Litigation. I'm Catastrophic. I am a partner and attorney in the HOA law practice at Tressler. That's a mouthful. I have focused my practice for what seems like an eternity, but in reality, it's only been 15 years. During those 15 years, I've gained wisdom and knowledge in more than just the HOA law practice. All of these experiences have given me a leg up in dealing with associations and have taught me to look at the bigger picture and to see the other side of the equation.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm Cindy Fitz with CISA Insurance. On November 6th, I will actually be celebrating 18 years with CISA. Interestingly enough, that is also my anniversary with CAI. As my first day with CISA, I was voluntold that I was on the membership directory committee. Since then, I have been honored to serve on many different committees, and I am in the midst of my second term on the board of directors. My passion for this ever-changing industry continues to grow as we navigate the changes and evolving needs of all of our boards, associations, our property managers. So thanks for taking your time to be with us tonight. Hey, David, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm David Lockhart. Armed with an entrepreneurial management degree in 1990 from NIU and an entrepreneurial family background, I started Inside Out Painting with the goal of providing excellent communication and service to multifamily and rental communities. As demand for services grew, so did the requests from clients to take on more than just painting. Inside Out Construction Services was added in 2008, and Inside Out Roofing was added in 2016. Thousands of projects later, Inside Out continues to be a leader in the industry, using the newest technologies, the best people, and excellent communication skills to make sure that every project is a success. I hope you enjoy today's webinar and listening to our experiences and advice.
All right, so enough about us. We're excited that you've all joined us here today. If you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please feel free to add them to the questions box, and we will host a question and answer session throughout the presentation. So with that being said, let's get started. But one more point. So all three of us have dogs. I managed to get rid of my kids, but the dog could not go. So please excuse us if you hear any barking in the background. We've all tried, but we can't make any guarantees. So just bear with us. All right, so we've divided the presentation up into several topics. We would like to talk about what we consider board members gone wild, conducting our community association business in the fall of 2020 and beyond, and then how to be proactive instead of reactive. So we're going to touch on each one, and we've got a bunch of subtopics underneath there. So if something comes up, a question pops up, please put it in, and we will try to address it the best we can. So, Cindy, you want to hit up on the first one?
Yeah, absolutely. How many of you are currently dealing with boards that, you have a controlling president or an overwhelming secretary or somebody who's just trying to, direct everything to their own personal agenda? If you don't have one, I know you've heard of one. The three of us deal with that constantly, somebody who just wants to be the spearhead of everything and go all cowboy. But we want to remind you that that is a complete breach of your fiduciary responsibility. You've become an elected official by your community to serve the entire community. And while it's really hard for us all to put our personal agendas aside, we really have to focus on what the greater good is for our community. And, if that ties into your personal agenda, that's great too. So,
yeah, we've all been there. We all have experiences dealing with people just like this. And I'll take it one step further. It's not necessarily, a board member. I've had owners show up at meetings and try to control the meetings. So I want to reiterate that it's important for the board to take control of their own meetings. So taking it beyond board members just gone wild, make sure that you don't have those owners that are trying to control every situation. And even beyond that, they try to control, the communications behind the scene with managers. I've had one owner who can monopolize, time during a week. So, putting the kibosh to that early on is important at the board level.
Yeah, absolutely. David, what are you seeing on projects?
I think the biggest challenge that we see with the rogue board member position is board members instructing us to complete work that either hasn't been
Did we lose David?
I think maybe we did.
Oh, no.
So David was talking about board members trying to add things in maybe that haven't been discussed with the other board members or altering the project to something else. So when David's able to get back in, we'll let him continue.
Yeah, we could definitely touch base on that.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move into the next topic. So we don't want to just talk about the bad board members or bad owners, but we want to talk about healthy decisions that are made by board members. It's important to make sure that we're functioning as a board and that decisions that are being made are healthy ones. And by that, we mean ones that, are going through the proper formalities. You're going through the proper channels and making sure that those decisions are being made. It's not just the board president bringing in, I got this guy and he's the one that's going to do our parking lot repairs. No, that's not the way it works. It's, we're a board for a reason, and most boards need to be able to learn to function that way. So it's about making healthy decisions. And sometimes with healthy decisions comes disagreement, and that's okay. And it's hard for me when I, get a phone call from a board member and they're like, you don't understand. No, I really do understand. Just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean that it's not going to move forward. That's why we're a board. That's why decisions are made by a majority. So keep that in mind, that it's okay to say no. If you don't agree with something, don't feel bullied into making a decision because everyone else is going with it. Stick to your gut and say, no, I'm not going to agree to that. And look, if there's an impasse, there's an impasse. We'll move on to the next one.
Right. Right. And I think it's really important that everybody brings their piece of the pie to the meeting. If you've been dedicated to research this and somebody else research that, it's really important that you prepare and bring all those options together and research different things. Kind of like Kathy said, just because you have that person who's qualified to do the landscape or paving or whatever does not mean that that's what your board is going to think is the best. But I think you've done your due diligence when you bring to the table what you think is your best effort and bring that best presentation. I think that helps for building that healthy community. And of course, my favorite part, avoiding insurance claims and lawsuits and having to deal with paying Kathy on top of paying the landscaper or whatever to do the project. Those things, that's how those get out of control and very expensive.
Yeah. And again, it's reaching your fiduciary duty if you're not doing the research and putting the work in. And a lot of board members don't understand that. They're like, it's a volunteer position. I don't have hours to spend on that. Well, then you need to rely on your professionals. If you've got a property manager, and I'm not saying pawn it off all on them because that's not the intent behind it. But, certainly that they're a professional. They're there to give you the steps that you need to move you along. But that doesn't mean that as a board member, you don't have an obligation to go and do your own research. You can't just rely on the information that's being presented in front of you. You have to look into it a little more.
Absolutely. And I think the important part of that, and I think David has joined us and can talk about this part too, is welcome back.
That's an interesting start.
Yeah. So we're talking about putting your best foot forward and checking out all your options. And something that the three of us really wanted to talk about was getting those requests for proposals rather organized so that everybody's asking their person the same questions and getting a full presentation. So do you want to touch on that, David?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. As a contractor, what we often get is vague information about the scope of work or what the community intends to accomplish with a specific project. And where we see that as a challenge is if several contractors are given a vague scope of work, it's difficult for the contractor to assume or to identify exactly what should be included in that scope of work, meaning specifically what type of materials, if it's a painting project, specifically what's to be painted. If it's a roofing project, is it, siding issues and things like that. And so what makes it challenging for the community is to then decipher when they get 4 or 5 proposals for work that isn't consistent, isn't bid consistent across all vendors. What we like to do is recommend that the communities work with either an architectural or an engineering firm, or they work with a company such as ourselves to create a more formal RFP to deliver to each of the bidders. That way, if all of those specifics are identified in advance, then the community can be certain that each bidder is bidding on the same scope of work, and it makes it much easier for them to compare value when they have a comparable scope of work.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. So I know there's probably a lot of people out here thinking, yeah, but that costs money. It's expensive. That just seems like a huge waste of time. What I will tell you is a waste of time is when you have to come to me, or then you're calling insurance and asking them, what can we do? Because now this work that we had done is leaking. The roof is leaking. That's not what we paid for. Can we get it covered under our insurance claim? Or they call me and they're like, we paid $150,000 and there's still water infiltrating. The problem with that is if you had done your homework and put together an appropriate RFP, request for proposal, early on, the contractors would have been in a better position to know the scope of the work and to identify the issues that you're having. So as a board, you could make a more informed decision. And yes, you are spending that money up front, but I can promise you that you're going to save it in the end when there is a problem.
A great example of that is with our business. With exterior painting projects, wood repair is typically part of the request. And if 3 or 4 or 5 different companies all go out and assess what needs to be repaired, and they're not working from an identified list that's been either created by one of the contractors or by a third-party engineering or architectural firm, what you're going to be relying on is each of those companies' evaluation of what needs to be repaired. A lot of that work is questionable, and it's difficult for a community then to get 4 or 5 proposals for a different scope of work and really know if they're going to, if they're making the best choice. It's common for us to see if a wood repair list is submitted that's large and it's costly by one vendor, but it's a small list and less costly by a different vendor. They choose that less costly proposal with a lower scope of work, and then it turns into numerous change orders, and the total cost ends up exceeding oftentimes the more expensive proposal that was more encompassing of the total scope of work.
Absolutely, that happens more times than we've all experienced it, both on our professional and on our personal level. That's right. It's part of making healthy decisions, and again, it's not always the most cost-effective method, but I promise time and money will be saved in the long run.
And you can reuse some of those requests for proposals. Every couple of years, you might have to redo your paving. If you're going out for insurance and you're, coming to me and my competitors, that list can be recycled. So you put that cost in up front and you're going to get the investment back multiple times, because while the laws might change and tweak a little bit, most of the information is going to stay the same year after year, or every couple of years as you go out to bid.
Yeah, and it's much easier to hold the contractor accountable when you're working with a defined list.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know that's definitely something we're going to touch upon with contracts, because that is something that comes up a lot of the time. But starting off on the right foot with an RFP is going to help avoid that later on. So again, totally a way of avoiding litigation.
Yes.
All right. I think we touched a little bit upon dictatorship issues, but just to kind of sum up what we mean by that is, we've all experienced the situation where you simply have one person running the show and you might have 2 or 3 or 4 board members who are just what I will call yesers. They're there, they're making decisions. Sometimes they're there. Sometimes it's hard to get them there because they really don't understand what they're doing. But it's part of your fiduciary duty is to make sure that you're functioning as a healthy board. You don't want a board of yesers. You want a board that is going to do what's best for the community as a whole. And again, we all know that there's people with agendas, but it's good to have, sometimes I hear complaints like, oh, we don't want that person on the board. You know what? No, I do want that person on the board. I want that person that's going to question, why are we signing this? Yes. Or why are we doing that? And I don't mean that because it's, I look at it because it's going to probably save you money in the long run. It's going to avoid work on my plate. But it's important. And I think it makes you look more transparent to the community when you have a fully functioning, healthy board.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would rather answer the same insurance question over and over and over until the person who's asking the question gets it. Mm-hmm. Because everybody gets it then. And that makes my job easier, actually, but it also makes our partnership easier because we're speaking the same language and we understand where each other is coming from. So I totally agree with you. I'd rather have the questions over and over.
Communities that are managed by a team instead of an individual, in general, they just seem to be healthier. Mm-hmm. You can tell just driving through the communities, the quality of the community, the financial situation, all of those pieces seem to be in much more positive when it's managed by a team instead of an individual.
Yeah. And likewise, you want to have strong individuals on the board, whether it's 5 alphas, that's okay. Sometimes you get 5 alphas on the board and it's fun to watch. I mean, I love nothing more than to sit back and watch it. But it's okay because that helps move things along. And again, if you reach an impasse on a topic, then you can decide to table it or bring it up, at another board meeting. And it might not be what everybody wants to hear, but that's what happens. So.
Right.
Yeah, and you can create subcommittees. When you've got a bunch of leaders on a team, you can create subcommittees and then you can spread out the responsibility.
Yep.
Yeah.
It works.
Absolutely.
It works. All right. So we've got communications and transparency with owners about association issues. From a legal perspective, I hear a lot about this from the owners. I get a lot of phone calls or I meet them in court. They send me emails. They're not listening to me. They're hiding things. Look, no board intends to hide anything. Owners need to understand that board meetings are for board business. So, and it's hard for owners to understand that sometimes. They feel that they can go there and they can ask questions, and that's just not an appropriate forum to necessarily do that. There's a time and a place for it. So you have to find a good balance between how much to communicate to owners about information that they need to know, and when you're giving them too much information, because then it's not allowing you to make those board decisions that need to be made so that you can conduct business for the community as a whole.
I agree. And I think I love the format of our virtual meetings now, that more people are able to join in and be part, more owners are able to see what's going on at the meetings and be part of them than they were before. And they're choosing to be part of them. I mean, I enjoy the calls where a unit owner says, well, I don't know what's going on. And I said, well, have you talked to your board? Have you attended a board meeting? It's your onus as an owner. You bought into this association. You need to choose to be part of it. Otherwise, business will just be conducted around you, and you're just writing that check for your assessments without really a say in what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. I think getting involved, attending the board meetings are the easiest way for residents to make sure that they're up to date with what is happening in the community and to make sure that they feel that there's transparency. within the community.
Yeah, and a lot of owners don't understand how boards function. So, I mean, the best thing you can do is tell them, come to a board meeting, listen in, see how it works. Or, I have owners that call and they'll say, I've never seen any financials. Well, you have, right? There are certain documents you can request to look at. Right. So it's an open book to an extent, but it's about being informed and being educated. And yes, it's not about just writing a check every month. For some people it is, and that's fine.
Right.
They choose to do that. But nonetheless, you still, as a board, have a fiduciary duty to make sure that you're, delineating the information that needs to be provided to your owners versus enough information to be able to function as a board.
Agree.
All right. So it doesn't appear we have any questions on this topic of board members gone wild. If somebody has a question that they've thought of now, please feel free to ask it, and CAI will let us know that the question has come in, and we can, circle back to it. But we're going to move into our next topic, which is conducting community association business in the fall of 2020 and beyond. And I promise we are not going to sit here and talk to you guys about COVID because we've all heard enough about it. But we really want to touch on some subtopics that, have come in light of the way we've had to function for the last 6 months, and how what we've experienced is now moving forward and how it might be the norm. So we've got a subtopic of contracts. And I know that from a legal perspective, contracts have been a very hot topic, particularly when we were dealing with pools and whether or not pools were going to open, and how to handle that. But the biggest part of contracts is the importance of understanding what you're signing. And that should have been the forefront of most people's knowledge before they signed a contract, but it wasn't. And it came into light when they finally had to look at it. So I think we want to talk a little bit about that. David, do you have any experiences with people coming back to you and saying, that's not what I agreed to. It's not what I thought I signed. And how do you handle that from your perspective?
Well, we don't often get that type of concern coming from a project that we've been involved with because our contracts are very clearly written. The majority of our proposals are submitted with photographs and documentation of the work to be completed. What I think we see more often than not is communities that are disappointed because they thought they were getting something else, and what they actually got or paid for or agreed to was much different than what their expectations were. And then they were sent to us to either clean up the mess or finish up the project because they had unfortunately agreed to something that they possibly didn't understand.
Yeah, and that definitely takes us to the importance of understanding what you're signing. And that's my same experience has been, well, now we're going to withhold payment. Well, you can't withhold payment because you're not happy with the services that were performed. They performed exactly what you signed on that contract. And again, then I have to have the conversation of, well, I'm sorry that you thought you were getting X, but you got Y, but you contracted for Y. So you needed to look at what you were signing. And I'm glad to hear that you guys have photos that you identify with it. But that's part of the problem is, we've got boards that sign these contracts. I'm getting tuck pointing work. Well, where exactly are you getting tuck pointing work at on your building? Like, did you specify, is there a diagram? Do you have photos of it? Because then the contractor comes out there, does the work that they believe they're supposed to do. They finish the work that they believe that they've been contracted to do, and they submit an invoice for payment. And then it's, well, we have no idea what you did.
Yeah, and any type of ambiguity in the contracts is what creates those problems. From a construction perspective, contracts should include square footages or number of units or linear footage. It should include counts, spreadsheets for the specific work that's being done, or location on the building, photographs showing location on the building. All of those things make it undeniable for either side to dispute what the contract is actually for.
Otherwise, you're going to find yourself with a mechanic's lane, and then you're going to have to come to me, and it's going to cost you thousands of dollars to remove this mechanic's lane when you could have just dealt with it up front with having an attorney review the contract before you sign it. And as much as I like to tell my boards that it's not always necessary, if you as a board or even as a property manager have that relationship to make sure that you know that everything that the board wants is in that contract and the board feels comfortable signing it, look, then maybe don't pass it by an attorney. But I like nothing more than to review it, make changes to it if it's necessary, and then put you in a position of trying to avoid litigation later.
And with the individual contracts, we know that the property managers work tirelessly to put together spreadsheets for price comparisons and making the information as readable to the board members as possible. But taking the opportunity to actually review the contract and make sure that you understand what all the additional wording is within that contract is extremely important to a successful outcome. There's much more detail than just the spreadsheet of the pricing that needs to be evaluated.
Yeah, I agree. And when I get the calls to check for the insurance section and what's in those contracts, I always end with, and have you had your attorney review the rest of this? Right. I can look at that insurance piece and understand it and advise on it. But the rest of those words, oh boy, no, we definitely need our attorney in there.
And I likewise do the same thing when I see the insurance. I'm like, I have no idea if we have adequate insurance on here. All right. So it looks like we have a couple questions that have come up just on this topic. So I'm going to take a break and make sure that we're addressing these questions. So the first question that we had was from one of our viewers, and it says, our homeowners have repeatedly complained about the property manager and are threatening to get a majority vote to have her removed. The board likes the property manager. Can the homeowners take this action? So from a legal perspective, the answer is no, the homeowners cannot. A board is empowered, whether it be in a condo or in an HOA, the board is the one that's empowered with the authority to engage the services of a property manager. We have owners that do interfere with that business relationship. And it's more than a business relationship. It's actually a contractual relationship, right? Associations enter into long-term management contracts, whether they be 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year, and you're locked into that. And homeowners coming forward and saying, well, we're just not happy. Well, honestly, the homeowners aren't actually the ones dealing with the property manager. The board is the one that's communicating with the property manager. So those types of complaints need to go to the board. If the board can do something about them, great. But if owners certainly start circulating a petition and think that they, have, a say in it, your only recourse is to get on the board and make that decision the next time it comes up for renewal, or you're, looking for bids on a new property manager, and speak your piece then, but not after the fact.
And I think that it's important to make sure that there's a clear understanding of what the property manager is capable of performing, because the property manager is limited in performance by the directive of the board. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that the board's involvement is impeding the property manager's ability to be more successful.
Absolutely. All right. I know we had a second question, so give me a second because I want.
Well, let me just add in. We have had those situations where we've had those property managers go wild and go a little rogue too. True. It is important that our board is aware of what our property managers are doing, and it is important that owners do communicate their concerns. But if you're just being a nagging Mrs. Kravitz, every day, that's not going to help anything. So it really does take the whole village to function together.
All right. So the second question we have is, hello, our property manager stated that homeowners cannot talk to board members providing complaints about specific work orders or projects during virtual board of directors meetings. Is that true? I hate to admit it, but yes, it's true. Board meetings are for conducting board business. There is, in most, whether you're a condo or an HOA, in an HOA, there's required to be an open forum during all board meetings. So there is a portion of the meeting that's designated for owners to be able to voice their concerns, their complaints, whatever the case may be. It's a limited portion of time. Boards are, the purpose behind a board meeting is to make sure that the business of the association is being performed in a manner that is open to everybody, where we can record meeting minutes and make the information transparent to everybody. It's not a forum where you get to go and gripe. If you have such a dispute, the appropriate way to do it would be to direct it to the property manager if it's a managed community. If it's not, then it would be directed to the board, via email. Put it in writing. But bringing it up at the board meeting is not the appropriate place, because that's not part of the agenda.
I completely agree.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's something I deal with all the time. And it's difficult when you're doing it virtual. But it's the reality of, I think, how a lot of board meetings are going to function. Look, owners can call in or view the board meeting. But again, the purpose behind that is it's an open meeting so that you can hear what's going on. So you can understand that work is being performed at the community for the community. It says so the follow-up question to that is that due to the open forum due to the current pandemic and doing meetings virtually, open forum is not allowed. So that is something that I would discuss with the board, because there is an opportunity to allow that virtually. I have performed Zoom board meetings where I have the ability to turn you on and off. I can give you 2 minutes to talk. So there is a way to do it. You should not be circumventing the requirement of having an open forum just because we're doing virtual board meetings. And I understand it's not the best way to perform business, but given the pandemic and the restrictions that are in place, we don't have a choice. And there is certain business that needs to continue to move forward. Otherwise, we're not going to have snow plowing. We weren't going to have landscaping. We weren't going to be able to have all of these things that needed to be performed in a community during the pandemic. I mean, painting still happened. People still repaired roofs. We still had asphalt repairs. I mean, other than, there may have been a shortage on certain materials, business was functioning as normal because we still needed to keep the lights on in the building.
Right.
Kathy, is it effective for residents that are not on the board to deliver their communication to the board in advance of a meeting and ask that it be discussed?
Absolutely. And that way the board is aware of what the situation is or what the complaint may be. And if it's appropriate to put it on the agenda, then the board can do so. Otherwise, the board's response should be, thank you for the communication, and the board will address it as necessary and then take it from there. So at least that way you're giving them a response. It might not be the response they want to hear, and it might tick them off even more than they're already mad. But nonetheless, you're giving them a forum, an avenue of being able to present their complaint.
Right.
When we've seen that done that way in advance, it seems that the conversation is far more constructive because the board has had an opportunity to evaluate the concern and put together a thoughtful reply.
Absolutely. Rather than being ambushed when you're on the phone. And look, tempers fly. It's a lot easier virtually than it is in person. Whether you're looking at them or just, you're typing, it's just like, I write much more eloquently than I speak. Because it's a lot easier to put your thoughts in writing. So it's actually a lot easier when you communicate it in advance because you can put your thoughts together and give the board time to put their thoughts together. So there's not that clashing at a board meeting.
It tends to be more constructive that way.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So I think we're done with that portion of the topic. So the next thing that should address reviewing the provisions within there, and within that includes making sure that the insurance limits are being reviewed. I know that that's a huge thing for Cindy. It's something she gets daily questions on. And it's something that I also get questions on. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the more important parts to me with this is that the insurance section requires that your contractors are providing certificates of insurance that list the board and property manager, if appropriate, as additional insured. It should also list the association as the certificate holder. Really important piece on that, so that there's some ownership and it connects back to the contract. So, we want to see their general liability on there. We want to see that they have workers' compensation, all those things. If they're going to be driving a vehicle on your premise, you want to have some hired and non-owned auto represented. I always have to think of the worst case scenario. If I'm going to have a roofer and Lord forbid he slips off the roof, something happens, there's going to be a spouse or children or somebody who's going to be coming and looking for the association to try to get that roofer back whole again, if possible. And so we want to make sure that all the insurance is where it should be and responsibilities fall where they should, which isn't always on our association, but could end up being if you don't take these steps up front.
Yeah, well, I had to have the conversation over the summer. We were having a roofing project done at one of my larger communities. And I had board members going up on the roof, like contractors, or they would go up on the roof, like, well, we just wanted to go double. I'm like, no, you should not be on the roof. Like, first of all, the roof is unstable. Like, that's why we're repairing it. Why do you think it's a good idea to be up there? So the fact that I had to have that conversation is kind of scary.
It is.
Again, the purpose, and the one was like, well, I don't see a problem with that. I'm like, you don't see a problem with being on the roof. Like, it's a liability issue. I can't believe we're having this conversation, but it happens. So making sure that, people understand that, one, you have insurance, but two, making sure that you understand the limitations behind it. It doesn't provide you as a board member coverage to be up on the roof if your roofer is insured. You have no business being up there.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I'd like to add to that too, when you talk about making sure that the contractor lists the community as an additional insured. I think it's important that the community asks the contractor if the contractor is going to be subcontracting any portion of the scope of work.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And if the answer is yes, then making sure that you get a certificate of insurance from the subcontractor as well, naming the community as an additional insured.
Yeah, excellent point. Because a lot of times we don't know.
Right.
Even on our own, I'm in a single family home, and I did ask my roofer that question, and he looked at me like I had three heads. He's like, "What do you mean? You want a what?"
Yeah.
We moved on to the next roofer.
Yeah. Roofing is a great example. A lot of that labor is subcontracted labor. And so if the primary contractor submits a certificate of insurance, but the subcontractor falls from the roof or injures a resident in the community, there's not a consistent way to know what coverage is if you don't have a certificate of insurance from the subcontractor as well.
Yeah. And then everyone gets named in the lawsuit. So it's great.
Right.
Yeah, really Kathy's extra busy for all of that, right? Yeah.
But you can avoid that by making sure that you understand what you're signing, making sure you have the appropriate insurance limits, having an attorney review it, and then working with your contractor to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And that's really what it comes down to. If you're not comfortable with any of that, you shouldn't be signing that contract. And it's unfortunate, but I know that I've heard boards say, we didn't feel we had a choice. You always have a choice.
Absolutely. And, we all know chucking a truck is going to be way cheaper than hiring that insured, bonded, protected contractor. Chuck in a truck isn't going to care, and he's probably going to disappear once he's done with your job.
Yeah.
When you're hiring somebody who's responsible, like David and his crew, you're getting what you pay for. That extra effort that you put in, that extra expense, it just multiplies for you and for your association, and to keep that structure healthy.
All right. So moving on to, we touched upon this already, but I just want to make sure that we all understand that when we're talking about contracts, not only are we talking about going out and having a request for proposal done before, but making sure that when you receive the contract, that the scope of the project is actually encompassed within that contract. And if it's not clear to you, then it's probably not clear to everybody else. So I would always recommend going back and making sure that the scope of the project is in fact set forth in the contract. And if there's any ambiguity, fix it then, because once in that contract, I tell people all the time, if it's not written within the four corners, you're done. I cannot argue anything if it's not on there. So some specifics that you want to be able to look at, and I know David touched upon this earlier. You talked about square footage, you talked about the number of units, and it really depends on the type of project. So let's just give an example of painting the exterior, David. Let's say we have a 32 unit townhome and somebody comes to you and they say, we want our 32 unit townhome painted. So your contract's going to say, we're going to paint 32 units. Or something to that effect, right?
Right. I mean, the scope of work is going to be critical. Our front door is included, our garage door is included. The individual line items need to be in there. Do they want the shutters painted? All of those things need to be clearly identified, because if they're not written in there, it's left to either side to really try to evaluate what they're getting in that contract. And again, it's not enforceable. If our contract simply says paint the outside of 32 units without any listed scope of work, we could show up with any type of paint product, we could show up with any type of caulk, and we could paint what we feel we should be painting without the community really having an understanding of what we're actually going to be doing, what kind of quality they're getting.
All right. So we're getting a lot of questions about meetings. So I don't want to just jump over certain topics, but I know that we wanted to touch on insurance coverage and making sure that we have adequate coverage. So let's touch upon that, and then we can move into the hot topic, which we all know is virtual meetings and annual meetings. It's that time of year. So we'll touch upon that. So please keep the questions coming. We'll try to address as many of them as we can.
Right. So I think we talked about the insurance coverage as far as having those contracts checked and verified, and again, making sure that your contractors have workers' comp. The other part of the insurance world, and if you've gotten your auto or your homeowners renewal, you're probably starting to see some of the increases that we're all expecting to come. Thank you, COVID. Thank you, wildfires. Thank you. I don't even know what hurricane letter we're on now. It seems like we should be, like every day, are we like up to Zelda or something? Because they're making landfall everywhere. So unfortunately, the reality is there is insurance, but it's going to get expensive for a while, because all of these losses, they're all coming out of the same pool to be paid. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to let you know, as you're working through your budgets and preparing for next year, you're going to want to up your insurance probably quite a bit. Talk with your agent, ask the questions now. I would rather have you budget too much for your insurance than not enough. You can plant some extra pretty flowers or whatever other thing that you want to do with the leftovers that the insurance didn't use. But we really need to be prepared for what's coming down the pike. Europe is hearing crazy things. And even though the United States isn't a precedent to what Europe's doing. It kind of trickles this way. So kind of scary. So I think, I think that was the part I really wanted to mention about that. Of course, always following your decks and bylaws, working with your agent, a specialized agent. There's a lot of generalists out there that try to write insurance for homeowners associations, for condominium associations, and they do a fine job. But if you want a great job working with somebody through CAI, through our industry, is going to get you what you need to be protected properly, meeting all requirements of the law. So I think that was what I wanted to add there. Yeah.
One of the questions that just popped up on that, Cindy, is what type of a percentage increase should they be budgeting for?
Yeah, I've heard upwards of 20%, which is, it's just scary. And we do have, I haven't seen them in my office, but I've heard from some other agencies that they are seeing those 20-25% increases already. So it's crazy.
Yep, it's definitely increasing, and there's been a lot of, they're like, we didn't budget enough. It's just something that you're going to have to deal with in the next budget.
Right. Yep.
All right, so we're going to move into compliance with the governing documents, and of course, I'm going to give the legal disclaimer here because a lot of the questions that we've had deal with they seem to be very specific to a particular association. So I cannot generally tell you what the parameters are for how annual meetings, virtual meetings, and meeting minutes are to be held given the current situation we are in. It is a very case-by-case specific situation on how you can address annual meetings and virtual meetings and what works best for your community. I will tell you, however, that the question that was raised was, our bylaws aren't specific on virtual meetings. Does Illinois law have anything in there that supersedes our governing documents? The Not-for-Profit Corporation Act has always allowed for electronic, well, I shouldn't say always. Within the last few years, it's been updated to allow for meetings to be conducted via electronic means. And what that means is, so long as owners have the ability to listen in and participate, whether that be in person or listen in or, watch on a video, they have the ability to view it, to listen. So you can perform meetings absent the pandemic. We would always perform meetings this way. It wasn't the most conducive situation. And now, given certain restrictions that were put in place, can't have gatherings of 50 or more. So what do? Personally, what we tell our clients is we have to work on case-by-case situation and figure out what's best for your community. I went to a meeting last night. There was 15 people present. It was a community of, I think, 48 units. So they had, only 20% of them showed up, and they kept spacing distance. We conducted the annual meeting just like we normally would. It was just done a little differently. I went to another one that's a 496 unit complex, and we tried to keep it under 50, and it definitely was more than 50. It got a little chaotic. We tried to, put proper protocols in place. Couldn't do it outside. It was raining. But there are ways to conduct annual meetings. So a lot of the questions that are coming in are April. April came, we were supposed to have an annual meeting, and now it's been delayed. Can we legally just not have a meeting? No, the answer is no. You're going to be able to have a meeting at some point in time. You just need to think outside the box and figure out what's best for your community and make that annual meeting happen. And again, trying times call for trying measures, and we have to try to figure out what's best. Look, if you don't think that an election can be fairly held or fairly conducted, then what's best for your community is postpone it. But I have had many communities hold their annual meetings, and we've been able to fully function and move forward. So you just have to do what's best for your community. And I'm going to let you guys chime in because I'm sure you guys have heard in the, behind the scenes what's going on or experienced your own.
We've seen boards be creative with their meetings too. If you have a parking garage, we've participated in board meetings that are in a parking garage. Some of the larger communities have had a tent set up and had an outdoor meeting with a tent with no sides. Obviously, that will present some challenges as the weather changes, but there are ways to be creative and still hold those meetings safely.
One of the questions is, how does the Illinois not-for-profit mesh with Illinois condo laws? Assuming that you've incorporated, and most associations are incorporated, you are incorporated as a not-for-profit. So all associations are subject to the Not-for-Profit Corporation Act. So yes, we have a Condo Act. It's great. The Condo Act doesn't speak to all aspects of corporate function. So sometimes we have to defer to that Not-for-Profit Corporation Act. There have been instances where, we've had to look at the Condo Act and we look at your declaration and we're like, oh, it's silent as to this issue. How do we handle it? Oh, wait, we forget the Not-for-Profit Corporation Act also applies. So it's another tool in your toolbox. It's just another act. The Condo Act is just a much broader act that provides more details for an association. So more legalities to follow, where the not-for-profit is more, I won't call it vague, more generally speaking, and it's intended to function for different types of corporations. But nonetheless, it's still there and still something that you should, review and understand. And in that act, it provides for, it doesn't say virtual meetings, just talks about meetings via electronic methods. So it's, again, that's a catch-all. And Zoom, audio, whatever you want to call it, FaceTime, Skype, YouTube, it's all there. It's another tool in the toolbox. We're getting a whole lot of questions, and a lot of them are very specific. So I apologize to those chatting on here, but without looking at your governing document, I'm not able to address it. I mean, generally speaking, I can tell you that no, the not-for-profit, we require an annual meeting. There is no prescribed time limit, such as 15 months beyond the last annual. You have to look at your governing documents. It's very specific. And, you might think that there's a meeting that hasn't been called, but maybe it has been called and maybe quorum wasn't met. There could be a number of different situations that arise that a meeting may have tried to be called and it just couldn't happen. So, and again, hopefully you've received notice of anything that, that your association is doing. So I'm just going to scroll through some of these questions and see if there's anything that we can address generally speaking.
I think, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, for those associations who have delayed their annual meetings and they have their obviously current acting board members in place, those board members will stay in place until there is an election.
Correct. So those board members continue to serve until the next annual election, which, look, for a lot of people, I get it. They want that old board out. We want a new board in.
Right.
Look, if the situation, and I will tell you, I have fielded several phone calls where, we have owners that they've been delaying meetings since March. And now we're like, we could totally figure out a way to handle these meetings and the board's not doing it. And as much as I hate to admit it, your only way to push the board is you'd have to sue them. But the reality is by the time you've sued them and forced them to do this, either the restrictions are going to be lifted and you're going to be at the place to be able to do an annual meeting, or you're going to force their hand and they're going to hold an annual meeting. It just doesn't seem like a good use of financial resources to push that limit.
Right.
But nonetheless, you have the right to do it. So I'm sorry that we can't address, very specific questions on here. But, refer to your attorney. If you don't have an attorney, reach out to me. You'll have my information at the end, and I will do my best to try and assist you with it. I know we just had another question pop up. So if there is no annual meeting scheduled, can homeowners petition for the annual meeting to be held? Yes, there is a way for homeowners to be able to petition. You go around and you get a petition of the owners, 20%, to require the board to call an annual meeting. Whether or not they call that annual meeting is a different part of it. But yes, as an owner, you have the right to go around, solicit other owners to help you petition to force the board to hold a meeting. Doesn't mean you as the owners get to call that meeting. And that's where the confusion lies. All you can do is you can circulate a petition, present it to the board and say, we, the owners, are demanding that you call a meeting. If that board doesn't act on it, that's a different problem. But as homeowners, you do have that right to ask the board to hold an annual meeting. All right, so it's also budget season. So I know that we want to talk a little bit about budget decisions moving forward. We have obviously had to deal with a lot of issues in, we budgeted $80,000 for pool use, and we couldn't use our pool. So a lot of associations took that money and they were able to offset it and use it towards other projects or deferred maintenance. So it's certainly something that we need to consider as a community in making budget decisions moving forward that are appropriate, given, anything could happen. And just when we never thought that this would happen. But nonetheless, it did, and we've had to deal with it. So it's important to take all things into consideration, especially now when we're looking at budgets. And, I can speak to the fact that most of our industry was very understanding and did release associations from any, long-term contracts that we had in terms of, pools. Obviously, if you couldn't open a pool, it didn't make sense to have to pay for a lifeguard that you don't have a lifeguard. And this was prior to pools opening. I mean, pools did open. They did open with certain restrictions. But at the beginning, we didn't know April and May what was going to happen. And so as an industry, we did have the ability to work together harmoniously and make it work so that associations weren't, wasting money on contracts that could not be performed. So it's certainly something to take into consideration when we're talking about budgets in the future. I know Cindy touched a little bit upon insurance and making sure that we're budgeting appropriately for that, if there's any increases on that. But the other consideration that then takes us into delinquencies and foreclosures. So this has been a big situation since collections were semi-halted, is what I'll call it. So the executive order that came down did preclude associations from moving forward with eviction actions. And while we were able to file the eviction actions, send out the collection notices, the courts have been precluded from awarding, shouldn't say that, because some courts are awarding judgments and orders for possession, while other courts are maintaining that no, the executive order says we can't, and they're simply just pushing cases out. But nonetheless, the sheriffs are not enforcing evictions. So we've got associations who are now dealing with owners who aren't paying. And unfortunately, look, we all understand we're going through a pandemic. Relief was given to some people. Not all people were able to go to work. So yes, people have fallen on hard times. But as an association, we're a business, and we need to remember that. And we have to treat people uniformly. We can't feel bad for the neighbor next door who worked in a restaurant and wasn't able to work for several months, so they weren't able to pay their bills. Unfortunately, we can't tell them, no, I'm sorry, you don't have to pay your assessments. There were concessions that associations were making. Some associations opted not to charge late fees, but the assessments were due and owing, and they needed to be collected. So the board needs to keep in mind that it's a business, and it's not about being friendly with the neighbor and keeping the peace. Although I know it's really difficult at times, you have to move forward. And if accounts are delinquent, you have to turn them over to legal for collection. And it's not me trying to fluff my pocket. I promise you that that's not what it is. You will not be able to function as an association and do those projects that you have worked so hard to try to do for your community if you're not receiving income. And that's the converse to that is we've got the owners complaining, well, you might be paying, but your neighbors aren't. So you definitely don't want to get on the board's bad side when it comes to, dealing with that situation.
Well, and Lord forbid you're not collecting those assessments, and you then may or may not be able to pay your insurance. Mm-hmm. And then what happens when that catastrophe happens? You may not have your deductible to pay to get those repairs done. I mean, it is utterly important to keep that business mentality going.
Well, what we saw during the housing crisis, like 2008 to 2010, in the communities that had significant delinquencies, one of the choices that many of them made was to slow down or halt property improvements. Mm-hmm. Instead of putting more effort into the collection of the delinquencies, they attempted to conserve cash by limiting improvements, and over a period of time quickly saw property values decline because the community in general went into disrepair. Yeah. It increased the costs years down the road, but in the short term really decreased the overall property value compared to the communities that were well maintained.
So some of the questions that we've seen deal with, delinquencies and how a board should act on those. So look, I'm not telling you to turn accounts over for legal action. I can tell you that we as a law firm have had a slowdown in collections for the most part because we have encouraged our communities to work with their residents before they're turned over for legal collection. But at some point in time, enough is enough. And it's about uniformity and consistency. And I can't state that enough. One of the questions that popped up, what about working out a payment plan? Fine, as long as it's uniform and consistent. You're not going to enter into a $50 a month payment plan with neighbor A and a $100 a month payment plan with neighbor B because that's all they can afford. You have a set payment plan. We'll give you 3 months to catch up. That's what it is. You need to enforce your normal collection policy. And I don't mean to sound, inconsiderate or, that I have a cold heart. It's not that. It's just a matter of you can't pay your bills. If you can't pay your bills, and you're breaching your fiduciary duty to everybody else. So, and yes, the other question was, could it impede legal action later? It might. If you don't document things in writing, or you get a homeowner that comes to court and they're like, well, I know they gave 3 other neighbors payment plans and they wouldn't give me one. Yeah, it's going to hurt you in the long run. So again, uniformity and consistency. If you give a payment plan to one, you better be prepared to give it reasonable versus unreasonable.
Yeah. And while we're talking about taking over units and when we're getting into those possessions of units, I want to make sure that property managers and boards are thinking about the fact that they are now responsible. Once they take over that unit, they're going to be responsible for the interior of a unit, which isn't typically a board responsibility. The improvements and betterments, we're going to be talking about paint and floor coverings and things specific to condos that we aren't used to insuring. But I can guarantee you that if you've taken possession of that unit owner is not carrying out their responsibility to insure their unit. And so the boards need to step up and make sure that they're insuring the interior of the units as well.
Yeah, we've come across that a number of times where a vacant unit was uninsured and a pipe broke in the winter and it damaged other units in the community in that particular building, and there was no insurance coverage for it.
Right. So the association in that case puts, the sticks back together and, first coat of primer on the walls and ceilings and subflooring on the floors. And, that's what the banks are left with. Typically it's a bank situation that we see there. Yep. Yeah. So, and another good point when we're talking about budget decisions, and I learned this from attending a CAI seminar myself, is a lot of boards are budgeting in their insurance deductibles when we're talking about these things. And I thought, wow, how cool is that? I'm doing this for almost 18 years and something I'd never thought of or even heard of. So I think that's a really great, important part to have that money allocated right there on your budget. Lord forbid you have to use it. At least it was already planned for.
Makes it easier to make that business judgment decision to make the claim and handle it, knowing that you've budgeted for it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you don't use it, then it just rolls over into the following year and is sitting there ready to be used.
Right. And hopefully you don't use it. Hopefully it just keeps rolling.
It would be nice. I do.
Yeah.
Cindy doesn't need any more work on her desk either.
I always need more work. That's yucky work.
We want to touch on catastrophic events. And when we're not talking about COVID, we're not talking about the current situation. What we're talking about is fires.
Yeah.
Major storms. And I know that in the last few years, we've had several communities that have been devastated by these types of catastrophic events. I had a community where it was garage units that were affected. And thank God it wasn't living space, but it was, the end unit didn't have the appropriate insurance coverage. And it was the one where the fire started. And then 3 garage units later, I got people who had no insurance coverage because they didn't have the right policy. So it just turned into just a one problem to the next. I had one that didn't have insurance, one that had, inadequate insurance, one had the wrong policy, and nonetheless, I had 4 units that were burned.
Wow. That is my nightmare.
It is. It was a nightmare. And then it turned into a major overhaul at a 505 unit place. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's why it's really important to be working with a specialized agent, somebody who's going to know to ask the questions. Is this a condominium? Is this a townhome? And if it's a townhome, is it insured like a condominium or is it insured like a single family home? Is it meet the requirements of the CISA Act or is it just subject to the Not-for-Profit Act? I mean, the questions just keep rolling. And when you're working with a generalist, they don't typically know to ask those questions. I had an agent just earlier, well, not this week, regardless, recently sent me the 2018 Condominium Act and started quoting things out of it. And thankfully, we haven't had a lot of laws change for condos in 2018 to 2020. But, my concern is they just pull something out and suddenly feel like they're experts about how this should be done and how they're protecting our unit owners, how they're protecting our associations. So, asking the questions ahead of time is so important.
Well, the question that just popped up in the chat was, our management company requires proof of insurance every year. And that's most of them do. But I will.
Wait, how do I do that hand clap thing? I know I have an option. Yay!
The problem is that you may tender proof of insurance. It might not be the right coverage. And that's where you were touching upon. And it's great that, you're collecting these certificates. And look, most management companies know what they're looking for, and they're able to kick it back and say, you need an HO6 policy. What you've given me is an HO3 policy.
Right.
And be able to kick it back there. But there are so many insurance companies that have no idea what you're talking about.
They really don't.
And it's an uphill battle. We're not going to fix it. So again, important to align yourself. But the thing that I advise communities is, if you have a large community and you see that this is an issue, bring an insurance, somebody like Cindy, somebody who this is what they do to educate you. And then those homeowners can go to their insurance companies, and they do. And we had a letter that was put together and sent out. This is what you're required to have. And it works for the most part. But the problem is the proof of insurance is great. It's that most people don't have the right insurance, or they don't have an additional insured, or some management companies require, actually some associations require the management company to be named as an additional insured on certain policies. And it just turns into I can't do that. No, it's a click of a button. Yes, you can. So it's a fight for sure.
Cindy, this might be a question for you. So through our business, we get involved in helping facilitate large loss claims that are due to wind or hail. Mm-hmm. And when we're in an HOA project where they're attached units, we find that since each owner has to have their own insurance that protects or covers the exterior of the building, as we go in to try to help process these claims, in a 300 unit complex, we're dealing with 300 different policies. Some of them are coverage related issues. Others are high deductible related issues where the individuals are either unable to afford their deductible or they choose not to file a claim. And in a situation where you've got a 6-unit building, if you've got 2 of the 6 units that don't want to file a claim or don't have the funding to pay for their deductible, how does that get managed?
Oh, it's insane. And that's always the 2 people that are in the middle, right? It's not,
Right.
I mean, Kat, you had a project and that never happens. It's always the middle guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
and we cannot do 4 of the 6 roofs. Like a roof system is a unified system.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's an insurance nightmare, and something that if you have ever heard me speak over the years, you know I'm always preaching. If you're a townhome, talk with your attorney, have the vote, get insured like a condo association. It's not changing your ownership style at all. If you're fee simple, you stay fee simple. I don't even know what that means, but I get that question all the time. But if you're a townhome, get yourself insured like a condo. You have 1 deductible. The board is then responsible for maintaining the exterior and doing these projects that David and Kathy and I have been talking about. As you can see, I'm passionate about this because when you do have all those different deductibles and all those different agents, and it can all be with the same insurance company, but you have 10 different agents and they all write the policy different. So it doesn't matter whose name's on the letterhead. It's just crazy. And David, I don't know what you do about that. That goes back to the board. They have to manage their owners. And, there are requirements in most decks and bylaws to, maintain to 100% standard living conditions. And so unfortunately, that's when, again, Kathy gets involved and, has to.
Huge project. I mean, it's a huge undertaking. And that's what but again, most of the time what happens is you have this catastrophic event and you learn from it. And then you move forward, and it shouldn't take a catastrophic event to get us there. Right. It shouldn't. So what we're trying to tell you today is be proactive, not reactive, right?
Exactly. And, like David mentioned already, deferred maintenance doesn't help anybody. Putting those projects on hold isn't going to help anybody. When we're talking about catastrophic events, it's always important to, have your list of phone numbers ahead of time. We all have our cell phones now. You put yourself a little association tab. I use color notes. I don't know what everybody else uses, but have what's our insurance company name? Who's our attorney? What restoration company do we want to call? Who's going to do the repairs inside out, after the restoration company has been there and mitigated some of those damages at the forefront? You
have that safety plan in place.
Yes. So vitally important to be prepared for this. And
catastrophic. It could be a huge water leak. If you're in the building and the sprinklers burst on the 5th floor, that water's coming down.
It is.
Fee. I mean, it's not a fire, it's water. So it's the same concept, just in a different, it's a different catastrophic.
Different medium, yes.
But yes, and unfortunately, it's one of those situations that, in hindsight, we wish that we had done this. So don't look at it that way. Try to plan. And again, people are like, it's never going to happen. Well, we didn't think a pandemic would happen either.
Right.
Can't think like that anymore. And it is part of your fiduciary duty. You got to think about everything, and it's a huge undertaking. So
it is. It is. And, just planning. And by the way, insurance companies in our industry aren't looking to cover these pandemic situations. We're in place to cover the structures. We're in place to protect the board of directors. We're in place to help insure your money, Lord forbid, something happens to that investment. Dealing with these pandemics, it's not what association insurance was ever set up to do.
Yep.
So, and it doesn't look like they're going to be changing that anytime soon.
No. We're not going to plan for it to happen again in the future.
Yeah. And with people being, I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
No, I sure hope we don't have to plan for this.
No kidding. And the other thing is, with people being home, our unit owners are more aware of what's going on. They are looking. I am fielding more calls this year than I have ever. Is this covered by my insurance? Well, what if it happened this way? What if it happened like that? Well, I had a hailstorm go through 5 years ago. I'm sure that's where the damage is from. Can't we insure it? It's really been interesting fielding these situations. And so
we don't have hot water. We don't have hot water. Well, the fact that your building is 65 years old and everyone's home, right? A 42 unit building, you're probably not going to have hot water.
Right.
And it kind of is what it is. You can't plan for that. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Unfortunately.
So I think we're at a good place to move into the next topic of how to be proactive instead of reactive.
Yep.
We've definitely touched on it a little bit. So this is kind of getting more into the nitty gritty of a lot of situations that associations have found themselves in, pretty much dealing with projects. And it's not just necessarily large scale projects. It can be the smaller projects. So the first thing we wanted to touch on is reserve studies. And I know that a lot of people cringe at the thought of a reserve study. I love reserve studies.
Me too.
I can tell you, go back to your reserve study. They told you that in 5 years you're going to need a new roof. You should have budgeted for it. But it's important to ensure that you have one. Look, there is a variety of reserve studies out there. If you don't feel that you can afford one that is, really in depth and really gets down to the nitty gritty, there are other options available for you. It's just a matter of finding the right reserve study for you. And I unfortunately learned the hard way that there's, a multitude of reserve studies, because I think there are some boards out there that just assume they're all created equal, and they're not equal. So again, making sure that you're doing your due diligence in, who you select to do your reserve studies is just as important. I know we wanted to touch a little bit upon, you may not necessarily need a new reserve study. There's a lot of associations who have them, right? We've got some that are 5-10 years old, and you could simply ask for it to be updated. I know the reserve study people might not like to hear that. Ideally, from an association perspective, we'd like to build on what we've already, had and what we've done. But you're not recreating the wheel. But again, there's a lot of issues that arise that weren't contemplated in the original reserve study. We live in the Midwest. Our weather is constantly evolving. We had the polar vortex. Who would have thought that was, I mean, it created some damage. How do you budget for that when our reserve study done 5 years ago didn't plan for a polar vortex, right? How do you handle that? So it's important. It was at least important enough for us to bring up in this topic of that's a way to plan in being proactive instead of reactive. I know that there's a question, so let me quickly touch base on that. Actually, that question just went away. So, all right, so we're just going to move on. We definitely wanted to touch on reporting of repair and maintenance obligations. And I know, David, you can speak to this because I know that you handle, after the fact, right? Like they contact you and they say, we think we need, X, Y, and Z done. But then come to find out that, they've known about X, Y, and Z for the last 10 years. And they haven't done anything with it, right? So then you're in there to be this, magician, and you're going to make it all better with what you've got. So if you can speak to the importance of reporting repair and maintenance obligations and having a plan in place.
So going back up to the insurance piece, just to touch on that and the importance of these maintenance obligations or the repair obligations. we've seen a number of instances where insurance claims have been denied from large loss, meaning in our case, wind or hail, because there was identified maintenance on the buildings that was never performed. So roof maintenance being a perfect example, the repairs that were required were identified either in a reserve study or some other type of proposal from a contractor. The board chose to not move forward with the work, and then they have a hailstorm. The insurance company comes out and they're able to identify that these deferred maintenance items existed in advance or they were pre-existing to the storm. And we've seen storms, the actual claim get denied because the deferred maintenance wasn't performed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Sad but true. Yes.
We had a question raised that poses an issue about repair and maintenance and what to do when a board doesn't undertake to do that. So specifically, the question is, what do you think of a board who takes 6 months to fix an elevator during COVID? And I will speak to it generally, not just saying, an elevator during COVID in particular, let's just say an elevator in normal circumstances. So there is a difference between a board doing nothing and doing something. So if a board is made aware of a situation that the elevator is broken and consistently ignores doing anything about the elevator, that's a clear breach of fiduciary duty. We can all clearly state that. However, there may be circumstances that are beyond a board's control to be able to undertake repairs. For instance, that elevator could have a very intricate part that needs to be shipped in from China, who had they couldn't ship items to us at a given point in time. And I will tell you, this did happen during COVID. So it's not just me pulling it, out of thin air. There were circumstances where people were unable to get parts. And I'll tell you, an instance of that was security cameras. We had a situation in a community that their security system was unable to be repaired because the parts were coming from China, and that manufacturing, they were part of, that section. We won't talk about it, but they were part of that section of China that had been shut down. And so manufacturing had ceased for a number of months and they couldn't get the parts for it. So it wasn't, and thank God it didn't turn into a safety issue, but nonetheless, the board was aware of it. They weren't just simply sitting on their hands. So I would love to be able to address the question of what, if a board, they appear to be sitting on their hands. You have to look at the converse of that and think about, what if they weren't sitting on their hands? What if there was something more to it? And they just couldn't undertake their repairs. And I know I talked to David about this a little bit earlier with shortage of supply. So David, if you could just talk to us a little bit about that from an industry perspective.
Well, if the person that asked about the elevator lives in Geneva, we were on a project this year where the elevator was out of commission for probably about that amount of time. And it was directly related to the fact that the particular shaft that needed to be ordered couldn't be sourced locally. And so the elevator was down for an extended period of time. And that goes back to the communication and transparency. Mm-hmm. If there's activity and that's happening and the board is not making the community aware of the activity that's happening, I can see that causing a lot of frustration. So it's making sure that you're asking the right questions and understanding why those repairs aren't being undertaken. Yeah. The other side of that, from a material perspective, we've had a number of challenges this year with different products that we install on properties. And that continues to plague us even coming into the fall. One of the things that came up earlier when we were talking about budgets and the idea of adding to your budget for insurance, the same is true of projects that you may have multi-year contracts for that include a lot of material costs. So things like roofing shingles or siding or items like that, where if you're in a 2 or 3 year contract you should be evaluating those contracts to see if there is an opportunity in there for the contractor to increase their price to offset those material increases, because we're seeing material increases from our suppliers 20%, 22%.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at budgets, projects that you may have had estimated this year that you're planning to do in 2021, the contractor may need to reevaluate those due to price increases that the contractor is directly incurring.
Yeah, we have a number of, I live in Huntley, and there are a number of communities who pay for the fencing. And a number of those communities that I happen to represent had significant increases in their fencing costs, because it wasn't contemplated that, we weren't going to be able to get fencing materials.
Right.
So yeah, they ended up paying, I want to say the one community was like 18% more, because, and they hadn't budgeted for that. I mean, and what do you do? Well, we had a contract to have the fence installed. Now they've got the fencing material. What do we do? You have to pay for it. So it's important to think, to be proactive and to think over budget for it, because again, we don't know when the material shortage is going to lift. We don't know what the future holds for certain. I mean, look, we can plan for certain things. We can't plan for all of it. So,
right.
Yeah. And one way to negate some of those increases from a supply perspective is sign your contracts now for 2021, because as a contractor, we can lock in our roof shingle pricing now. We can lock in our siding prices now for 2021, but we can only do that with a contract. So communities that choose to wait until next spring, they're not going to be able to take advantage of the cost today.
Yep.
They're going to be exposed to potential increases next year.
Well, and the other point to that is too, and we saw this not too long ago in Illinois when we had those tornadoes going through a little bit south of all of us. The prices to get the material there, just in general, in a catastrophic event, the prices go up. They get expensive. That bulk discount that we all like to count on doesn't exist in those catastrophic events.
And pricing here locally goes up. If there's a hurricane in Texas, material gets diverted to those areas that are hardest hit. And so then attempting to get material in this market, the price goes up because material is being diverted to other locations.
Yeah, great point.
So we're paying a premium for that.
Yeah.
All right, we have architectural controls, and I know that I wanted to touch on this a little bit because it is a topic that I get asked a lot about, whether it be, the roofs all are required to be the same color. We want it to be aesthetically pleasing to the community, or, we've got a certain type of window that needs to be installed or a certain type of sliding door that needs to be installed. You may have those restrictions in place on your books. The problem is that owners aren't aware of them. So it's important as a board to make sure that we're spreading the word, and as property managers, if somebody's calling you and asking you, is there a color that I need to be picking? It's important for people to have a set standard, if in fact you're allowed to control that. So I don't want everyone to think that all of a sudden you can go out there and be like, we're only allowing brown colored roofs. No, it's only if you have those architectural controls in place already. But it's important to make sure that we're dealing with that proactively instead of reactively. I will tell you that we had a community probably last fall. It's been about a year. Guy installed a new roof in the community, and it was a completely different roof than everybody else. And they made him take it off. And he did. He had to get a new roof because all he had to do was ask the right questions.
And it's important that those controls are specific. It should be more than it's just a brown roof. It should be, this is the specific shingle that needs to be used on your roof.
Yep. Yeah. If you allow shaker style roofs or you don't, you better be specific about it. And that was the situation we had. So.
Well, and not only that, unit owners need to be aware that they can't just up and move a wall in their unit.
Oh. Yes. Oh.
We had a big fire in a unit from a contractor trying to, I don't even know what he was trying to do that the fire started. Oh, what, it was rags from the painting and moving pipes and plumbing things. But you just can't up and move walls. Those need to be approved.
With a board. And they were like, what do you mean? It's within our unit. I said, how do you that wasn't a structural wall?
Right.
Exactly.
Just because it's within your unit doesn't mean it's well, I said, what about the plumbing that was in there? You just
it
was connected to 3 other units. How you jacked up their plumbing?
Oh,
yeah.
Are you serious? We're having this conversation at this
point. Right. So architectural controls really spans a big territory.
But again, proactive instead of reactive, making sure people are aware of this. And it's not just, here's your declaration, your bylaws, please read through this. Oh, no. That will not. It's having it spelled out a little more. So,
and as a board, or I mentioned the nosy Mrs. Kravitz a little bit earlier. If you're seeing contractors trekking through your association, it's okay to be a little nosy and see what's going on and who's doing what. Sometimes that little bit of nosiness is that huge ounce of prevention that we all need to protect our homes.
Yeah, and I know we just had a question pop up about, we require owners to, submit written communication. Yes, most associations require architectural control forms to be completed, but I will tell you that a lot of people aren't aware that they're supposed to do that. So we could have it a requirement, and then you can simply go back to them and say, well, I'm sorry, you didn't follow the rules, and now you need to take your brown colored door, and you were supposed to have a tan colored door off. And I have dealt with that numerous times. I mean, I'm not kidding when I tell you we made a person take their entire roof off.
Ugh.
So, and I certainly did not want to be the one to tell him his new roof had to come down.
Right. That's a lot of money.
In place, and he was aware of it. He just opted to do what he wanted to do.
Oh, boy.
People say, I'm not going to abide by the rules. Well, then you're a rule breaker.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a different, that's a whole different conversation. So,
well, it goes through types of windows, style of garage door. I mean, it's everything.
There's a whole slew of topics that could come with that.
Kathy, if you don't enforce those type of architectural controls when they're written into the bylaws on one home, does it then limit your ability to do that on future homes?
It could if somebody challenges it and says, well, you know what, now you're telling me that I can't have, and I'll give you a prime example. I have a homeowner that's actually come to me now that has said, we bought this lot with the intent to build on it. We have complied with all of these rules, and the board is telling me that I can't have these particular, my architect has drawn them up and I can't have this. And the homeowner came to me and said, but there are 23 other homes that have this exact type of cantilever. I think she called it a cantilever, like decking, like off of it. And she's like, they're telling me no, but they got 23 other homes and they surveilled it. Like they had done their homework. And again, it comes down to uniformity and consistency. You better be, if you're going to do it to one, you better be doing it to all, because it could be used against you. You can say you're not going to come after me and make me take down my fence when I've got 20 other homes in the community that have fences. You're picking on me. That's what it comes down to.
Well, and that's why it's important too for boards to have discrimination coverage on their D&O policy.
Absolutely.
Because you don't think, we all think of discrimination as being, a race thing or, something like that. But this is completely a discrimination situation. And that's why it's important to have that. And most D&O policies don't have it. That's an important coverage to ask for.
Yeah, because it takes it beyond directors. It takes it outside the scope of your director and officer. I mean, that's definitely, it's more of a personal thing than it is capacity as a director and officer.
Yep.
All right. So supervision of projects. I know that this is something that is near and dear to all of our hearts because this is the crux of what we get the complaints on is Cindy will deal with it. Somebody got hurt. Proper procedures were not put in place to ensure that, adequate measures were being taken on the supervision of a certain project. David gets it on a whole different aspect because you're the actual person out there, right? So let's say that, you're out there and you're painting something the color that you believed was chosen. And then all of a sudden this board comes in and was like, that wasn't the color that we chose. And now you've painted the entire building, right? Well, somebody is supposed to be supervising these projects as they go along. Like maybe not necessarily there while you're painting it, but being involved throughout the process to make sure that as the project moves along, that the appropriate scope of the project is being fulfilled. And I'll tell you, for me, it comes up with exterior projects where people aren't home and the contractor's there and the contractor believes that they're doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. And then we get to the end of the project and the board's like, well, tell me what you did. Well, I can't really tell you what I did because it's a huge building and I can't point out every nook and cranny, but there should be procedures set up to account for that. Walkthroughs, daily reports. Most contractors do give daily reports. This is what we're working on today. Just giving you the heads up. And David, I know you can tell us how you guys handle it because I like when I hear contractors that do that.
Mm-hmm.
So any project that we do is assigned a project manager. And the project manager has a number of responsibilities. It's anything from maintaining the schedule to making sure the residents in the community are safe to managing the actual quality of the work that's being done. One of the challenges that we come across is communities have an expectation, in some cases, that the property manager is going to supervise the project.
Yeah.
The property managers, they're involved in so many aspects of the building, so many aspects of the community bylaws, and it's really impossible for them to be experts in everything related to the building.
Yep.
And so when those type of concerns are brought up, or where there's an expectation that by the board that the property manager is going to be responsible for supervision, we frequently recommend that they engage a third-party company to perform that supervision. So we suggest that they bring in an architectural or an engineering group to supervise us. We don't feel that we need supervision, but it just adds an extra measure of security for the community, because you mentioned earlier that you had board members up on the roofs walking around trying to inspect the work. Maybe they're experts, maybe they're roofers.
They thought they were experts. Let me tell you.
If they're not, then they're really, along with the property manager, they're really not qualified to provide that type of supervision. And that's when we recommend that a third party be engaged to work with us directly to help facilitate or support that supervision. Other things that are extremely helpful are photo documentation of work being done. So photo documentation both before and after of work that's being done. And then just consistent communication, daily updates on schedule and progress and things like that are critical to the overall success of a project.
Absolutely. And again, it's about being proactive instead of reactive. And unfortunately, I'm handling it more on the reactive side because they're not happy with what has transpired, or I've got a contractor that's not happy and they're walking off the job. And I never want to see that happen. And it's because there's been, and I won't say lack of communication, it's probably ignorance, for lack of a better term, because they didn't know what they were looking for when they engage these people. And I can't put it on the contractor because it's not your job to educate the board on making sure that they understand every aspect of it, because you're an expert in what you do. I'm an expert in what I do, but I don't pretend to understand what a balcony repair is. Mm-hmm. It's just, It's not the scope of my project. And it's difficult when it comes to explaining that to them after the fact. And I'm sorry that you thought you were getting X, but you got Y. And part of that could have been dealt with by having, and I wholeheartedly, after the last 3 incidents that I've had, highly recommend the structural engineer coming in and giving you the assessment, because then it sets the path for, you to come in and say, well, this roof needs this, this, and this done. And then the next person comes in and does their work, all built on the same scope of the project under their supervision. And again, it's not them hovering over you. That's not the intent behind it.
Right. And if repairs or improvements are structural in any sense, that's when having an architectural or a licensed engineer to help participate in both solving the problem, but also in the supervision, it takes the responsibility off of the contractor for making sure that the structural repairs are done as needed, and also off of the board to try to manage that, to understand if that's done properly. So we frequently work with third-party with engineering and architectural firms to facilitate work.
Yep. And
that's
it should
great.
So it's, again, proactive versus reactive. It's important. Yes, there is an added cost, but again, I can promise you that it will cost you less money to pay that structural engineer or architect than it's going to be on the tail end to deal with all the issues that have come up. I can 100% guarantee.
For the balcony falls off the building.
Right. Right.
So, all right. Our next topic, we had talked a little bit about this, but due diligence in the selection of contractors. And again, that circles us back to the RFP process and making sure that, when you've gone out to bid, that you're procuring bids from the correct contractors, and that once you get those bids, that you then do your due diligence in making sure of what that contractor does before you sign off on it. And I will tell you an experience that I had recently was he appeared to be a general contractor, not really sure, he claimed to be that. You go on his website and all of a sudden he'd be like, oh, you need some asphalt repair? I can do that. Oh, I can do tuck pointing too. I said, oh, you're a jack of all trades, just what I wanted to see on a contract. And I couldn't help myself but tell the board this during we were discussing it. And I said, look, I'm not the one that has to live with this. I am simply telling you that based on other facts and circumstances, that you as a board need to do your due diligence. And one of the board members piped up and was like, yeah, she's like, I actually looked up his company. He's got some really bad reviews. He's got some really good reviews. I said, okay, take that with a grain of salt. You got to take it beyond that. It's not apples to apples and, or apples to oranges for that matter, because it could be. He might be saving you money on this, but it'll end up costing you more money on something else. So it's about due diligence, and whatever that may mean for your community, it's really up to the board. It's just making sure you do it.
Yeah.
Well, and you're not going to have a divorce attorney write your condo decks and bylaws.
No.
I mean, it's same field, but boy, we missed that target huge.
Yeah. Because he told me he was only going to charge him $250.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's the way. That's the reality of what happens. Is people think that they're penny pinching in this area, and then it bites them in the end. And it's important to, again, proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah.
Take time and do your due diligence. And look, there's a lot of boards that don't understand that just because we've used Joe Smith for landscaping for the last 10 years does not mean that we have to continue using Joe Smith.
Right.
There are other contractors out there that might give you a better deal. You might even get better service. So,
and keep them honest too. And I say that about insurance too. You should be going out to bid. You should be checking. You should be asking questions. You should be verifying. I tell anybody that I work with, get in writing every year that my insurance is compliant with whatever act applies to your association, Condo Act, CISA, even if it's not for profit, it's good to hold people accountable.
Exactly.
Yeah. In addition to an effective RFP process, it's important to meet with the contractors, to pick the top 2 or 3 contractors for the project, and meet with them in person and get to understand what their company is about, because companies are much more than price. What the service that you're going to get and the attention that you're going to get, those are the kind of questions that you can ask in person. You can really start to understand who you're going to be working with and and how their business is structured, how they perform their work. All of those pieces, in my opinion, all those pieces are at least as important as the price.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So our last topic of the night, and it's certainly a hot one, is Band-Aids versus complete repairs. And it's definitely come, full frontal. We had a lot of people that were home, that were able to, experience living in their home, whether it be a condo unit or a townhome unit, full time. So spending a lot more time there and noticing that there are issues at the community. And then we find the board being faced with, do we make smaller repairs now and contemplate larger repairs in the future, depending on, what their budget is? Or, do we just full blown undertake the repair right now? And the converse of that was, we've had communities that have just been doing Band-Aids for years. And now all of a sudden it's, oh my God, it's going to cost us $500,000 to do this work and we don't have it. So again, circles us back to reserve studies, the importance of reporting repair and maintenance. Look, there are some communities where people are afraid to report things. And it's unfortunate that happens, but it's true. They think that they're going to be somehow, blacklisted, that stuff's never going to get done in their unit if they're the constant, complainers about the water's leaking, the water's not hot, I got mold around my windows, whatever the circumstances is. But nonetheless, it's about handling it and not sitting on your hands. And if a Band-Aid is all that we can do right now, you better be able to justify that to the community.
Right.
Yeah, and that definitely goes back to the reserve study piece. Communities that haven't adequately budgeted for capital improvement projects, those communities are less desirable to new buyers. As a new buyer, if I'm coming into a community and I'm looking at the condition of the roofs and I take a look at the financials for the community and I see that there's no budgeting for the roofs and the roofs need to be done in a year, I'm going to make the assumption that there's either going to have to be a loan or there's going to have to be a special assessment that's required in order to get that work done. And that then becomes less desirable. That would be a less desirable purchase for me because there's a financial unknown.
Absolutely.
Right. And that makes everybody's home values drop.
Right.
Yeah, or then you get the complaints of, well, I don't understand why we have to have a special assessment. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't tell me that you don't want to live in the conditions that you're living in if we don't have the money to do it. And I don't care what has transpired the last 10 years. The now is that we have the situation, the board is aware of it, and they would be breaching their fiduciary duty if they didn't do something. And the solution is a special assessment. You might not like it, but that's the only way to get the work done. Look, if you think that there's been a breach of fiduciary duty in the past, then do what you got to do. But right here, right now, the board is dealing with this situation, and that is the best that they can do, is to raise the funds to undertake the repairs. And it's the hard truth. And look, I'll be the first one to tell you, I don't care. You could scream at me all you want, but special assessment may be the only option.
Right.
Yeah, we go into a number of communities where they're proud of the fact that they haven't raised their assessment in 10 years. But they then don't have adequate funding to actually get the work done. And a special assessment creates a much higher emotional response than a small incremental monthly addition to your assessment.
Yep.
Very well said.
Yeah. They pride themselves on, we haven't raised assessments in 10 years. Yeah. You also now
for money.
Yeah. You do all these things. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So I get it. We can all, we could talk about this for hours. But nonetheless, it's certainly something to look into and being proactive versus reactive. I'm just going to look and see if we've got any new comments. I don't believe anything new has come in. So hit us with your thoughts. Let us know if there's anything that we haven't touched upon that you think that we can quickly address. We have a few minutes left. And again, if there's something that you believe is going to be, in depth, that you'd like to reach out to any one of us, our information has been provided to you. So please feel free to do so, especially because we understand, typing it in a chat function might not necessarily be the, method of communicating what you're trying to say.
Right.
Three of us would be happy to talk to you about it further.
Absolutely.
All right. So I don't hearing from anybody. So with that, I think we can end the webinar and say that it's been successful. And if anyone that's attending thinks that there's a topic that they'd like to hear more about, that we could possibly branch off and make it its own topic, or have suggestions on other topics that they'd like to hear about from CAI, we'd be welcome to take that back to the board and discuss with them other condo Q&A that we think that we should be having in the future. So with that, good night to everyone.
Good night. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.